In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Seitz Kreuznach Pacific Blue. So let's jump straight to the end with, what do I think about this ink? This is a solid shading ink and is very well behaved on the page and easy to clean from your pen. I find it's a shame that it's only available in bottles because I think if more people could sample it, more would be inclined to try and then love this ink. I haven't tried any more from their line, but it really makes me think that if all of their inks perform this well, I would really like to be able to try all of them, although at the time, still, this is the only one, sadly. I like how well it truly does shade. I expected, because it says Pacific Blue, I expected it to be a bit lighter. I expected to feel underwhelmed, and it was not. I do see this as a blue that stands out as a blue amongst all the blues that are out there. I think it looks really good, and I'm very happy that I have it as a bottle. Spoiler. I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is a Pelikan M800 with a medium nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. While writing with the extra fine, you definitely get the feedback of the nib in a very pleasant way on this paper. It gives very nice shading. I really do like its lighter tones, which are not too light to read, and the shading is so nice. Now, in the medium and the broad, because the medium was a bit wetter, it spread a little bit, but that was more because that is a very broad medium pen and it's very wet. So it didn't spread out of any negative thing for this paper. As would be expected, we get no bleeding and no ghosting. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Sailor Pro Gear Slim Mini with a fine nib, a Cross Bailey with a medium nib, a TWSBI VAX 700 with a Fountain Pen Revolution broad nib. The next writing sample is done on Leuchtterm 1917 paper. While writing on this much more absorbent paper, we still get a great deal of shading, just like we did on the Clairfontaine. The color is very nice on the page. Truly an ink I can see that somebody would want to use as their go-to blue. But the most noticeable thing to me is that while writing with the medium and the broad, both still gave very good shading. I want to say they shaded just as well as the Japanese fine did. None of them have any kind of feathering, which is always a good thing, although Leuchtterm's not really known for that as any kind of a problem. We do get some minor show through, although I don't see that stopping somebody from using the back of the page, but we get absolutely no bleed. It doesn't touch the page underneath or even come through. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done on Moleskine paper. Second time in a row, this paper is really going to stand out as performing especially well with such a bad reputation. It shades very nicely in the extra fine, nicely in the broad. It does show itself quite a bit in the medium, although I think the medium gave much more of the dark tone. I was expecting a lot of feathering here. Now, the only place I see a tiny bit of feathering is in that very wet medium. Like in the word Egyptian, there's tiny feathering. And in the word learn, on the same line, a lot of feathering, but all of the feathers are very tiny. I'm not zooming way in because I feel that that's just over exaggerating a problem and making a problem out of it for no reason at all. More pleasant surprises as it doesn't bleed and there's very minor ghosting. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a composition notebook. A much toothier paper to write with by far. The most noticeable thing as we look at it, we see that the color itself is much lighter than it's been on the other papers. And this is a result of the paper, not the ink or the pens. So it will kind of, I don't know, dilute the color some. There's still some shading that comes through, and it's very easy to read. We get no feathering. I always enjoy how well this can perform on this paper. This paper is always a joy for me. Always a bonus is the fact that there is very minor feathering, some of the smallest, or feathering, ghosting, some of the least amount of ghosting that you could expect for such a thin paper, and there's absolutely no bleed through. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Delta Blue. Here is KWZ Azure number 5. Here is Noodler's La Couleur Royale. Here is Pen BBS number 183. The next writing sample is done in a Mead 5-star notebook. We get some minor feathering that's going on. It's a lot of minor feathering, but it's still very minor feathering. It occurs all over the medium and all over the broad writing, but not so much in the fine writing. So if you're using this very inexpensive paper, but with a fine or extra fine nib, like that Japanese fine, then you can find yourself in a very good position in performance. We still do get some shading, most noticeably in the extra fine, although it does show itself a bit in the medium and in the broad. When I'm checking for bleed through, I have a piece of paper underneath. Now, only two tiny little spots actually touch the page underneath, and if that's something that's going to drive you crazy, that's a big problem. We do see that because it's getting very heavy into the page, in certain spots, the ghosting from how deep the ink is getting might be its own problem. But if you don't write on both sides of the page, there is no reason to have any kind of problem using this notebook. While it's nice to compare it to other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is a brown ink by Califolio Sepia. Here is a gray ink by Caran d'Ache, their Chromatics Infinite Gray. Here is an orange ink by Tag, their Cairo Iro Moonlight of Higashiyama. Here is a yellow ink by Diamine, their Amber. If you'd prefer different complement colors, then there's links to those different playlists down in the description. Or you can click on my face. That'll take you to my channel page. Then click on the playlist tab. Scrolling down, you'll be able to see all of the playlists that are here on the channel. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. We experience a small amount of feathering that's going on in the Japanese fine and a little bit of spread, but because it's such a thin line, I don't see that being a particular problem. Even all of the tiny feathers, there's tiny feathers over the entire thing, but I don't see this as something that should stop you from using it. Now, when we get to the medium and the broad, as we would expect to experience, we get much more feathering. I see the feathering is still being rather acceptable for the paper. But there's a lot of spread, and that spread you have to be aware of because at times it could feel like you're writing with a felt tip marker. When it comes to the bleed through, I marked the dots where it touched the paper because I fold the paper in half to do this, and it only made two little marks, which is very impressive for cheap copy paper. But we do see how frequently it was ready to come through, even though it didn't. This has got some heavy ghosting, and it's a little dangerous when it comes to bleed. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? This is a good shader from every pen, but definitely better from a medium flow fine. That's really going to bring out the shading. Unless you want solid lines, then go with a wet fine or wet medium to really make sure that you don't have shading, and you can get a good, solid, very nice looking blue here. Thanks for watching.